Ah, good morning, everybody. How are you? Yeah? Okay, so I have a little something I want to talk about today, which is actually not a little something. It's actually a big something. And for some people, it is kind of small and on the shoulder, and for some people, it's like huge and looming, and for some people, it's like a whole committee of input that's there all the time, and that's the inner critic. Now, the original name of this talk was Banish Your Inner Critic version 2.0, because I had a version before I wrote my book, which is, incidentally, Banish Your Inner Critic. But one of the last times I did this talk, I realized that it's really more about this kind of idea that you have the power to change things, change your mind with your mind, and sometimes you can do it through really simple exercises. So I'm going to share some of those with you. So we're going to be talking about how to kind of essentially mentally swipe left, delete things and move on and replace what you don't want with something better. So if you're tweeting, obviously my handle's Denise Jacobs. You know the handle and the hashtag for the conf. And if you want to use the hashtag for the talk, it's #BuyInnerCritic. In the United States, there was a whole thing with Bill Cosby. Does anybody remember the whole sexual harassment with Bill Cosby? And Felicia Ayers Allen, who played his wife on The Cosby Show, basically came out and was like, oh no, those things aren't true. And people were like, you are dead to me. Bye, Felicia. So to take that on, it's #BuyInnerCritic. So the first thing I want to talk about is how we really need to recognize our own creative power, how you can recognize your own creative power. And I'm going to tell some of this stuff through some stories. So in 2009, in March, I was at South by Southwest. You guys have heard of South by Southwest? This huge international creativity conference. Little fun fact, you may not know this. I mean, it's obvious, but it's not something that people know. I started going to South by Southwest in 2006. And in 2006, it was this very sweet, cute little conference that literally had about the number of the attendees that are at this conference, had about 600, maybe 700 attendees. And by 2009, it had gotten bigger. But so I was there at South by Southwest in 2009, and something happened that was a really pivotal experience that literally changed my life and has a lot to do with having me stand here before you today. So I was at a party. This is the party that I was at. This picture was taken moments before I said 5 words that changed my life. I ran into a friend who, his name was Robert Hochman, Jr., and he had written a book, actually 2 very successful books on user experience that came out somewhere like 2008, 2009, and he was there with his editor, Wendy Sharp, who worked for Peach Pit New Writers, which is a very big technical publishing company. And little did I know that this was going to be of such import. I was actually unemployed at the time. I was looking for work, but I had this dream of becoming a writer, and I also had a dream of becoming a speaker. And I ran into Robert and Wendy asked me, what do you do? Now, instead of telling her what I did, which is like, girl, I'm looking for work. Ain't nothing going on but the rent right now, okay? Instead of saying that, I said, well, let me tell you what I want to do. I want to speak more, and I want to write more. And she said, you know what? We're always looking for authors. And I have this idea about a book on troubleshooting CSS code. And I said 5 words that changed my life, which was, I could write that book. Me, right here. I could do it. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that if you had known basically all the things in my head that were going to get me from take me from being this person who wrote this book to getting on stage like a few months later and having my first international speaking engagement in London at the Future of Web Design. If you had known all the crazy things that were going on in my head, like I literally, when I was talking to her, was just like, you're going to tell her you write a book, like you need a job, like you don't need a book deal, you need a job. And I was like, no, but I really want to do this. If you had known all the mean voices in my head, you would have thought this was never going to be possible. And you know what voices I'm talking about, just like Tom was saying, right? You're not good enough. Why are you doing that? That's a really bad idea. That's stupid. You're a loser. You're not creative enough. Your ideas are not unique enough. What if somebody laughs at you? Somebody's going to judge me. I should just not do it, right? We all have these voices. And you all also know how they make you feel, right? They make you feel crappy, and it sucks. I was actually at a conference where a guy has this great tool, which I have to get a hold of at some point, where he has people pull out their cell phones and just start saying, how do you feel about this? And and it just comes up and it starts making a word cloud on the screen. I was like, what? I want one of those. So I had to do it the old-fashioned way and make my own word cloud. But still, same thing, stuck, miserable, demoralized, terrible, constrained, less than, stifled, trapped. It's bad. The inner critic is no joke, right? And then it leads to things like imposter syndrome and feeling like you just downplay your accomplishments, right? Like you may be a really talented individual, but because of your inner critic, you totally, yeah. I was talking to a guy at a conference last week, and it was for people who were instructional designers. And he said, well, I know a little instructional design. And I said, well, how long have you been doing it? And he said, about 10 or 12 years. A little? Just a little bit. Just, like a quarter of your life. What? That's the inner critic at work, just completely downplaying what you know is actually there and is actually true, right? My main concern with the inner critic, particularly as somebody who calls herself a creativity evangelist, no, it's not religious, unless you think that creativity is my religion, which is kind of true. As a person who's a creativity evangelist, my concern with the inner critic is not just the emotional damage that it does, but the fact that it actually blocks creativity. And this is not speculation. Studies have shown that the inner critic, when the inner critic is present, creativity actually can't happen. I'll talk about that in a little bit more. Now, here's the thing. The other thing I think that's really important about this is that creativity is power, right? And as a matter of fact, this is something that I want to hear from you guys. We don't have the little handy-dandy texted in there, so you're going to have to shout things out for me and say it loud because I want to hear it. What does it feel like when you're in creative flow, when the ideas are just coming to you and it just feels amazing? What does it feel like? What do you feel? Don't make me call out on you because I will call you out. Like I have no shame. I will just point at you and say you. So, Power. What else? Magic. Happiness. What else? What? Nurturing. Ooh, haven't heard that one in a while. Yes. What else? Nurturing, like supportive. What else? Freedom. Easiness? Dizzy. You can feel dizzy, kind of like wrapped up with all of it. Sure. But I also like easiness. What about time? How does time feel? Just expansive, I saw that. What else? Does it go fast? Is it like you can't believe how quickly time passed when you were just immersed in this process? It's amazing. If that doesn't sound like power, I don't know what does, right? And like I was saying earlier, this creative flow actually means that there's no inner critic. There's a part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, and part of the prefrontal cortex, when what it's in charge of is self-evaluation, self-judgment, behavior modification, behavior management. When that part of your brain is quiet, and this has been shown by studies of people in MRI machines and as they were doing like improvisational jazz and hip hop, when that part of your brain is quiet, that's when all of those ideas are able to start flowing out of you. So the problem, I say, when we are really wrapped up with the inner critic and we're believing all of those awful things about ourselves, we are essentially giving our power away. And we're relinquishing all of those wonderful things that you just said about flow. We are basically blocking our access to that. And so, therefore, the inner critic's a major problem. It makes you feel small. It makes you think small. It keeps you from being as great and magnificent and wonderful as you possibly can be. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, where does the inner critic come from then? I'm like, okay, I know it's a problem, but like, I got this thing, or I've got this team of evil judges behind me who are always weighing in on stuff when I don't want them to. Where does it come from? So, basically, based on the research that I've done, plus, of course, a lot of experience in the field, based on all of that, the inner critic comes from the fears that we have about ourselves, the things that we're afraid are true about ourselves, plus the negative things that we've heard from other people, right? Parents, teachers, siblings, other peers, coaches, anybody who is a person of authority, bosses, managers, right? Anybody who is an authority in our lives that said something negative, particularly when we're early in our earlier years, that goes in and it affects us. And the reason is because our brains are just really, really too good at memorizing and remembering criticism. What happens is there's parts of our brains that when we get a negative piece of criticism, it just lights our brains up and it starts this whole cascade of reactions. And that is because of something called negativity bias and fear conditioning. So check this out. Think back, let's just imagine you're a hunter-gatherer. We don't have all these like wonderful modern things, devices and Wi-Fi and, espresso machines. We have to actually go out and find our food. And let's say you're out back in the day, out in the woods or out in the meadow, and you're walking, you're looking for food, and you see this snake come out of the grass. Brightly colored snake. Whoa, my God. And you jump back. If you go back to that area, particularly if right after you saw that snake, let's just say you saw a really beautiful butterfly passing by. When you go back to that area, are you going to remember the snake or are you going to remember the butterfly? Guess what? Spoiler alert, I'll tell you. You are going to remember the snake, and that's because negativity bias basically makes us scan for danger and scan for negative things, and as soon as we see it, fear conditioning takes a hold of it, puts it into a part of our brains that goes into something called implicit memory, which is memory that you don't have to think about. You can use it really quickly, you can access it really quickly, and it's there to help you in states of emergency. So you just go into automatic action. But the problem is that it works too when we get criticism. So as soon as we get a criticism, it goes into implicit memory, we remember it forever, and then it affects our actions. That's where the inner critic comes from. The inner critic is there as a protective mechanism to help you potentially try to save yourself from future situations where you're going to have such criticism. The problem is that it actually ends up being a little too trigger happy, a little too sensitive, and acts when it really doesn't need to. Here's the good news. So that was the bad news. Here's the good news. The good news is that we've got mental power tools. This is great. And we've got mental power tools that we were literally born with. Like, you don't have to do anything to get these. All you need to do is try to cultivate them, make them stronger, okay? So the first one is great. It's neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is basically our brain's ability to shift and change in the face of different kinds of stimulus. So just like the inner critic actually developed because of neuroplasticity, well, that means that we can actually tone it down with neuroplasticity as well. And it's all about what we think about the most. If you're thinking about all these negative thoughts and you're letting all of these thoughts about you're not good enough and I don't know enough and I need to learn more and I can't learn fast enough and it's not unique enough, I'm not creative enough, of course, what's going to happen is it's going to be like a path where you're walking in the forest and you just keep walking down the same path all the time. Well, that path is going to be super duper well worn. Your brain's just going to do this all the time. Well, great. All right, we got it. Whereas, if you start to think different thoughts and you start to go down a different path, the longer you do this, the more that actually something called synaptic pruning will start to take care and get rid of that path. And just like a path in a forest grows over with disuse, so will that path in your brain. Cool, right? Woo, just got chills thinking about that. So, the main way that we can manage neuroplasticity is with our attention. It's with what we pay attention to. So I want you guys to do something for me, just really quick. I want you to, it doesn't even matter what's in your right hand, I want you to just look at your right hand. You can hold up your phone or whatever it is, look at your right hand, okay? Now I want you to hold up your left hand. Don't look at it yet. Now I just want you to slowly shift your focus from your right hand to your left hand. Is your right hand still there? Yeah. Are you paying attention to it? No. Does it matter what's going on with your right hand now that you're not paying attention to it? No. That is the exact same thing I'm suggesting that you do with your thoughts. Those thoughts are going to be there. But the less you pay attention to them and the more you pay attention to different thoughts, the less likely you are, the less strong that these thoughts are going to be, right? So one thing I just want to say about attention that I think is really interesting is that attention is actually determined by three things. It's determined by how new and interesting whatever the stimulus is. It's also determined by the strength of the signal. If something is really loud, of course you're going to pay attention to it. And then it's also how much attention we give it. So if you really make an effort to change your attention and change your focus, that will actually determine attention. That's the first power, or that's actually the second power tool. Next power tool is mindfulness. So we also have this amazing ability, which I'm super excited about, to know that we're thinking about something, to have this awareness of ourselves outside of ourselves. If you're upset about something, or if you're thinking about something, you're excited, there is part of you that's actually outside going, wow, look, I'm really excited about that thing. Or like, oh, look, wow, check it out. I'm like super upset right now. You may be crying your eyes out, but there's part of you that goes, like, I'm totally crying my eyes out right now, right? That's that kind of presence of mind that we have as sentient beings and allegedly being the top of the food chain. You know, I don't know if we're really the top of the food chain because there are other animals who don't, like, mess up the plant they live on, but that's a different argument altogether. Amen. Thank you. We'll talk later. We'll be like, yeah, humans, whatever. I want to be a whale. Whales don't mess things up. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Excuse my tangent. So mindfulness is like this quality, our ability to be completely present, right? To actually know what we're thinking, to know what we're doing. And also, it's our ability to not get wrapped up in what we're thinking, to actually know that we're thinking these thoughts and say, oh, hey, I'm thinking that thought. Why don't I think this new thought, right? So mindfulness is also an amazing power tool. And then the last power tool, which is something that you may not use that much, but I encourage you to because it's incredibly powerful, is self-compassion. Now, before you get your hackles up and say, oh, self-compassion, like that sounds like some new age, like super, like get in touch with your feelings kind of thing. No, let me put it to you this way. If you had a friend, for example, who was having a really tough time, and they came to you and they were like, look, I'm really going through some stuff right now, and I just need to talk to you. How would you feel towards that friend, right? If they were a really close friend, you really cared about them, what would you feel? You would probably feel sympathy and potentially empathy, and you would care about them, and you would really listen to them, and you would give them the time and care that they needed. So many times we don't do that for ourselves. Self-compassion means treating yourself like you would treat a friend. Now, let me just go back here because I have the notes on this slide. But a couple of really cool things is that self-compassion actually helps us release oxytocin, which is basically kind of like the cuddle caring hormone, right? It also decreases insecurity. It decreases self-consciousness. It decreases our ability to compare ourselves with others. And it also enforces things like grit and resilience and mental toughness. Self-compassion is not wimpy. Self-compassion is incredibly powerful. So now that we've got this self-compassion template, here's what I want you to do. This is what I want you to think of, at least to start thinking of. Ways to recognize your inner critic. I have a couple of ways that you can do it. You don't have to do this now. If we had more time, I would actually have an exercise where we actually got to do something with this. But if you aren't familiar with your inner critic, or if you're in denial about your inner critic, I see y'all. If you're not in touch with it, here are some really good ways to kind of get in touch with it. If you just finish these sentences, if I blank, then people will blank. Like, if I create something, then people will judge me, right? I'm not fill in the blank. Unique, creative, smart, educated, rich, whatever, enough, right? I can't whatever because of whatever. I shouldn't because I haven't. And because my ideas. You can fill those in however you want, but when you fill those in, you will start hearing your inner critical voice. Now, what I really want you to do is to start stepping into your creative power, right? So that is basically what the rest of this presentation is about. And like I said, based on the story that I told you at the beginning, I'm going to tell you some more stories about my life, about how I've dealt with my own inner demons, my own inner critic, and was able to step into my own creative power, and I hope that this encourages you to do the same. So the first thing I want to talk about is overcoming self-doubt. Now, I showed you that picture of me at South by Southwest in 2009, but we're going to take it back. We're going to get in a Wayback Machine, and we're going to take it back to when I was about 12, and I was at Girl Scout camp at Camp Whippoorwill in someplace in Ohio. I literally don't know where it was. I just got in the car and went with my parents, whatever. But so that's me and my best friend, Emily, at camp. And so we had arts and crafts, an arts and crafts segment where we got to have like this time, a couple of hours to make stuff. And so we were drawing, and I drew a mermaid. Yes. Now, my friend Emily was super into comics, and I really wasn't, but she was my best friend, so I was trying to get into the mindset, and we both would draw together, and she would draw all these like superheroes with muscles, and I was like, yeah, I can do that too. So I drew a superhero mermaid. 12 years old, by the way. You guys are like, psst, shoot, I was drawing like Picasso when I was 12. Okay, still. So I drew a mermaid, and I was super excited about it, and Emily was sitting next to me, and I was about to show it to her, and I was showing it to her and everything. There was a girl in our group named Heather. And Heather was blonde and super cute, and she comes up and she looks over my shoulder and she looks at my picture and she goes, "It looks like a frog." And I was like, inside, I wish I had had the training, that I had the gumption to be like, "Oh, really?" But sadly, what I really felt like inside was like this. And my thought to myself was, maybe I'm just not as good at drawing as I thought I was. Now, I was suffering from something that I refer to in my book as judgment dread. And I was also suffering from something that I refer to as creativity denial, where I started to actually deny the fact that I was creative. I actually let this unsolicited mean comment from somebody that I didn't even know and really didn't even particularly like. I let that comment affect what I knew to be true about myself, which was that I could draw. It was part of my identity, right? So here's a cool thing. Let's take it into something practical. Here's a cool thing. Your thoughts, just because you were thinking them, aren't true. Interesting concept. Just because you're thinking something isn't true. And they may feel like your own thoughts, but remember, like I said, it's all this input that you have internalized from other people, parents, teachers, peers, siblings, etc., right? They're born from other people's beliefs and perceptions about you, or they could have just been having a bad day, frankly. So here's what we can do. We can use a technique that's called cognitive reappraisal, which is basically looking at your thoughts and thinking about them and saying, is this really true? My recommendation, think like a scientist. Take your critical thought and turn it into a question, like a scientist would. So if you're just like, dude, I'm such a loser, turn it into a question. Am I a loser? Is it categorically true that I'm a loser? And then you have to actually, like a scientist, you have to get evidence. Okay, well, let's see. I spoke at this conference. I travel internationally. Let's see. I wrote 2 books. Technically speaking, that does not put me in the category of loser, right? Another thing that you want to think about, actually another thing that you don't want to think about, frankly, is something called rumination. This is what we do when we have a thought and then we think it over and over and over and over again. And I don't know about you guys, but I tend to do this when I'm really tired, right? You know how like somebody will say something critical and then it's just like on auto repeat in your head and you can't stop it? You're just like, where's the stop button? Where's the pause button? Shut up. Blah. Right? So rumination is taken from the name that animals like llamas and camels and cows and etc., they take the food and they chew it over and over again and they digest it and they bring it up and they chew it and over again. Same thing we're doing but with our thoughts. So here's a really cool, quick body hack that you can do. If you take a squeeze ball and you take it in your non-dominant hand when you're ruminating, and you just squeeze it for a few minutes, it actually will trick your brain into stop ruminating. Crazy, right? Very, very cool. So they've done studies and everything. It shows that there's like a process going on in your brain. It stops, it truncates the process. So get yourself a squeeze ball if you're prone to ruminating. And by the way, there's 2 kinds of rumination. There's something called depressive rumination, which is when you're thinking about something that happened in the past, right? Oh my God, I can't believe that I did that thing, and I shouldn't, I was so stupid to think to do the da-da-da-da-da. It happened, it's gone, it's done. Or anxious rumination, where you're just like, I mean, what if they don't like it? I mean, what if, I'm going to do the thing, and then I'm going to give it to them, and they're going to think it's awful, and then I'm going to get fired, and You're like, hasn't happened yet. You have no idea. So if you're prone to either one or both, hand squeeze will totally help. And then finally, if you're experiencing a blockage of ideas, you really want to have your ideas, you really want to work with them, but you're just stuck. Here's something that my writing coach told me when I was trying to get over the finish line with my book. Totally freaking out. I'm like, I've got 5 weeks to write 7 chapters. What am I going to do? She said, how's your anxiety level on a scale to 1 to 10? I was like, 8. And she said, is there something that you would like to do with your hands? And I was like, I just want to make a pair of freaking earrings. Is that so wrong? And she said, all right, go make some earrings. We'll talk in a couple hours. Make something with your hands. By making earrings, by the way, here's some of the earrings that I make. But making something with your hands actually, again, truncates those processes in your brain, and it actually helps your brain relax enough so that these ideas will come through. So it doesn't have to be earrings. Sometimes people do coloring books. Sometimes people doodle, just random doodling. Sometimes people actually construct something, Lego, just anything that is just something that you do with your hands that'll just let your brain wander, and it'll calm down enough so that those ideas will come through. Earrings. All right. Next thing that I want to talk about is owning your expertise, right? So, I was 12 with Heather, and now I have come to the ripe age of 14. Here is a picture of me with my basketball team. Now, I had played basketball a few years previous, had a really bad experience with the girls on the team. I was like, forget y'all, I'm not playing basketball anymore, and besides, that's so stereotypical for a tall black girl to be playing basketball. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go to the library and I'm going to read because I'm a geek. But then they talked me into it. No, you should come back, Denise, come on. Because, by the way, I was 5'11", which is about 183, 182 centimeters, about 182 centimeters, I think, roughly. Yeah, I was almost this height when I was 14 years old. So, when you think of a tall, young black girl and basketball, what do you expect her to do? During a game, what do you expect you're going to see? Dunking, he says. Awesomeness. Phenomenal playing. When it came to be playing the games, I was absolutely terrified. As a matter of fact, when it came to be game time, yeah, just in case you can't see, that's me there. When it came to be game time, I would try to find the place on the bench where I could hide. So the coach was down there and I was there. It would be about 3 people in, so it wasn't like I was at the end because that's super easy to see, and I would sit there. And then invariably at some point, my coach would lean down and she'd be like, Denise! And I'd sit there and I'd be like, and so I would drag over to her and I'd beg and I'd plead with her and I'd be, Miss Canine, please don't put me in. Please, please, I'm not ready yet. Don't put me in. And you may be thinking, why? And it's because I actually didn't think I was that good. See this girl here with the number 32 shirt? That's my friend Anita. She was amazing. And I never thought I could hold a candle to her. So I was like, why bother? They can take care of it. I'll just play and practice. Right? And by the way, check out the posture. I don't look like I'm trying to go anywhere, right? I'm just like, give me a cup of tea, like I just want to watch the game, y'all. So, to make matters worse, I had a friend, a guy that I had a huge crush on, whose name was Wyatt. And Wyatt used to say to me, annoyingly enough, he would call me Niecy. Nobody calls me Niecy except for my family. But he'd be like, Niecy, why aren't you out there dominating? You should be dunking. Like, why aren't you doing all that? I'd Be like, oh, the pressure. And so my thought was, everybody is going to judge me for not being an amazing basketball player. That was my inner critic. I was suffering from something called comparison syndrome, thinking that I wasn't as good as Anita or the other players on the team, and that I wasn't as good as I should be, being a tall black girl. I should somehow magically, just by osmosis, be an amazing basketball player. It's like in my genes or something, right? Not only that, but I was being super highly self-critical, right? Whatever I do, it's going to suck, so why bother? Now, here's the interesting thing that I will say. Again, I was 5'11". There is no way, and I'm 6'1" now, I'm 185 centimeters. There is no way that people cannot notice me, particularly in a country like this. I go places and I'll be like, wow, I'm the only one. Hi, everybody. You're not going to miss me on the street. There is no way that I could hide even if I wanted to. And so it would have been good for me at that point in time to figure out what my uniqueness advantage was. What was the thing about me? And think about this for yourself. What is the thing about you that you may feel like isn't good enough or that you're ashamed of or something like that, but actually makes you unique and sets you apart from other people? Think about what that is. Think about how being unique helps you and not hurts you. And think about how much easier your life is if you are exactly who you are instead of trying to be somebody else. Another thing I want to talk about with this, and another thing that was happening to me at that time, is that my self-talk was awful. I kept telling myself that I wasn't any good, and so I didn't even put myself into a position to get myself to be better, right? So how often are you doing that for yourself? Well, you know, I'm going to do this thing, but it's not going to, so I'm not going to try, right? Self-talk is actually something that everybody does, and it is a part of actual thinking. It is part of how we learn, and it is part of how we manage ourselves and control ourselves and motivate ourselves. The problem is that our self-talk usually sucks. So my recommendation is to have what I call a self-talk reboot. And this is through doing something called self-distancing, which is to actually refer to yourself in the third person or refer to yourself by your name when you're talking to yourself. So instead of being like, okay, I am going to go up on the stage and I'm going to give the best presentation that I can. Instead of doing this, I would actually talk to myself like a coach would. And this is actually something that athletes, really high-performing athletes, people who do really well at stuff, they actually use this technique. Again, studies have shown that this works. So what you would do, or what I would do, I'll use myself as an example, instead of being like, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this thing, which actually has been shown to be not as effective as saying, Denise, you are going to get up on that stage, you are going to give the best presentation that you possibly can, and then you're going to drop the mic, boom, and leave, right? Talk to yourself as if you are being coached through it. So talk to yourself in the first person, get distance, talk like you would to a friend, and then give yourself encouraging information. Soothe yourself and tell yourself the truth about it. You're going to go up there, you're going to do the best that you can. And then you use just a really quick affirmation like, you're going to do great. You are going to do great. That sequence is an incredibly powerful sequence. Another thing that I was experiencing with this whole basketball stuff, and something that you may be experiencing too if your self-talk is kind of jacked up, is something called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is basically when you think you're going to see something, you see that thing. If you think that people are going to be mean to you, then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you're at the post office, the post person was rude, and then like a taxi driver almost cut you off on the crosswalk, and you're like, see, people are so mean. But let's say that you had a day where you got up and like you were feeling really great, and you're like, this is a great day, and you're walking down the street, and you like see a cute kid, and you're like, oh my God, that's so cute, what a great day. And then you go into the store, and you find some money on the floor, and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. It's because of confirmation bias in both cases. So the great news is this: confirmation bias is nonpartisan. Confirmation bias works to both the negative, but it also works to the positive. So we can use that to our advantage. One thing that you can do to use confirmation bias for the positive is, if you're having these moments of self-doubt and everything, is to do something, is to create what they call in marketing a swipe file. Have you guys ever heard of a swipe file? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I was just like looking like nobody's doing anything. So a swipe file in marketing is when they would, back in the old days, they would take little snippets of pieces of marketing copy that they thought were interesting, or interesting headlines, and they'd keep it all in a little file folder. And then whenever they needed inspiration, they would pull it out and look at it and be like, oh, maybe we can do something like that. We can do something like that. You have your different versions of that. There's code snippets people keep, and different examples of like great best practices in UX and all that stuff. So same kind of thing, but do this for things when people say nice things about you. When you get an email from your manager and goes, you did a really great job on that project. We're really happy with it. Or if you talk to a client and the client goes, that was amazing. I was so excited. Or after the conference and people like their positive feedback and you're like, we did a good job on the conference. Keep that stuff. Tweets that people send to you. Emails that people send to you. Messages on Facebook. Screenshot those little babies. Put them in a folder somewhere so that if you're having a bad day, you can go back and you can look at those things and you can say to yourself, I'm okay. I'm doing okay. Second to last bit I want to talk about is starting to do your best work. So I was 12 and I was 14, and now I'm 24. I'm 24 and I'm graduating from the University of Washington. And I'm getting my BA in International Studies. And I'm having a conversation with my father, and my father says to me, Denise, what do you think you want to do now for work? Now, I had done a program that was a very stringent program, and writing was a really big part of it. And I had even had professors tell me, one professor, I'll never forget this, Professor Eugene Webb, came to me one day, and he just looked at me and he said, you're a really good writer. And I was like, oh, thank you. And then I had my other favorite professor in the whole world, Daniel Lev, suggested that I do an independent study with him and that we would work on my writing. And so I would write essays and he'd give me feedback and all this stuff. And I even had a professor have me come and do tutoring, writing tutoring at the Minority Students Writing Center. So I was feeling pretty good about writing. So I said to him, with a little bit of trepidation, but still feeling like hopeful about the future, I think I would like to be a writer. And my dad said to me, as dads do, looking over the top of his glasses at me, and said, do you know how hard it is to get published? Now, let me tell you something about my dad. You may think, well, this comes from somebody who maybe was like a blue-collar worker, or, maybe didn't finish his own education, maybe just did high school but didn't do college. No, that was not my father. That's not the environment I grew up in. My father was the first person in his family to graduate from high school. He was the first person in his family to go on and finish college. His college degree was in aeronautical engineering. And then he decided he didn't want to work for anybody, and he decided to go back to school and get a doctor of optometry to become an optometrist. And in his spare time, for fun, my father built experimental aircraft and flew it. Yeah, that's my dad with the aircraft. The second Thank you. The second of 3 aircrafts he built in his entire life. I grew up with an airplane fuselage in the garage instead of a car. My father also, by the way, just incidentally, forgot to put in this little piece of tidbit. He got his pilot's license when he was 21 years old in 1957 in pre-civil rights Detroit. So my father, despite all of the barriers and all of the obstacles that he overcame in his life, still believed 3 really important myths that are pervasive in most societies around the world about creativity. And that is that artists starve, that creativity is something that you do in your free time and not as a job, and that very few writers, if any, ever get published. And so when he said that to me, I thought getting published is hard, so I should just forget about being a writer. Just forget about it. I was suffering from something called deficiency anxiety, thinking that I wasn't enough, I wasn't good enough, I didn't know enough, and it was just never going to be happening before that, because of that. Now, there is a great, cool body hack, again, to reprogram your mind when you have thoughts like this. Very interesting studies done by a woman at the University of Chicago about gesture and learning and how intricately connected making motions with your hands actually affects learning. And she works with children, and she actually does things where she teaches them how to work out equations, and she films it, and she does it where the person teaching it actually uses hand gestures to basically indicate subtract or add. And when they use the gestures, the kids learn better. And if they use the wrong gesture with the thing that they're saying, the kid will think that that's what they mean when they said something else. Crazy. So check this out. We have a very common gesture that we use all the time, and you guys have probably used it multiple times already today, if not during this talk. Do you guys know what gesture it is? It's the swipe left gesture. Delete. Don't want it. Keep moving. Go away. Not good enough, right? So, in the example of my life, with Heather's, it looks like a frog. Swipe left on that. And with Wyatt's, you should be dominating. Why aren't you ducking? Swipe left on that. And then with my father's, it's really hard to get published. Swipe left on that. Bye. Bye, inner critic. So that's one thing that you can use. If you find yourself getting into a place where you're thinking a thought that's negative and you want to get rid of it, try swiping left on it. Also, another deficiency anxiety is something I call proficiency anxiety, which is when people don't think they can learn information quickly enough, right? And in this industry and in just the tech field in general, we're constantly having to use and learn new information. Super hard to try to keep track of all of it. So one thing that you can do, there's a whole process that I outlined that I actually got from Nir Eyal, and modified it, but there's a whole process you can do in terms of managing how many things you research and gathering it up and everything and putting to use. But the best part about it at the very end is to try to explain it to a 4-year-old or explain it to a teddy bear. So if you learn a piece of information, or if you learn something, you learn a process, and you're trying to actually feel really confident about it and trying to feel like you really have a handle on it or you have a really strong grasp on it, try to explain it to a teddy bear. How would you explain it to a teddy bear? Or a 4-year-old, right? And that can be a really good tool for you. And then finally, in terms of owning your expertise, I encourage you, no matter how much you feel like you need to know, you most likely know at least one more thing than somebody else. You may not know what that thing is, but you probably know something, and you can share something with somebody, and that one thing can be completely and utterly valuable to the other person. And so I encourage you to be your brilliance, but to not just be your brilliance, but to share your brilliance. And to be a mentor and share your expertise. Write blog posts. speak at conferences like this one, actually mentor people at work, new people coming in, step up and say, hey, I'll take you through the ropes of this. By the way, it will help you actually get better at what you do. Teach workshops, teach classes. All of these things will help you actually feel more confident and more secure about what it is that you do know and help somebody in the process. So, to finish up, step into your creative power. Because of standing up to my own inner critic, okay, I was able to do things. Again, those mean inner voices could have kept me from telling Wendy way back at 2009 at South by Southwest, could have kept me from saying, I'll write that book. But because of banishing my own inner critic, swiping left on what Heather said to me, because that bitch didn't know what she was talking about, I actually became a designer and became somebody who loves doing design and loves drawing and loves doing artistic visual things and is a strong visual communicator. Despite my hesitations about being a basketball player, I finally stepped into it. A couple of years later, my friend Anita actually moved out of town. There was no tall girl on the basketball team. I was like, I guess that's what I need to do. And I became, if I may say so myself, I became a really good basketball player. Check me out. Thank you. I became a strong basketball player, and instead of being terrified of going on the court and having everybody see me and everybody potentially judge me, when I came onto a basketball court, I knew that basketball court was mine. And that also, I think, helped me get to a place where I can come on a stage and I can feel comfortable being on a stage and not be afraid that all of you guys are looking at me right now, right? It transfers. And because of swiping left on my father and saying, you know what, the whole thing about the publishing, my father did a lot of amazing things in his life, but guess what he didn't do? As far as I know, he never wrote a book and tried to publish it. Bless his heart. So how can he weigh in on something that he actually hasn't tried or done or know anything about? Despite that thought, I said those 5 words. I said I could write that book. And that enabled me to get not only one serendipitous book contract that literally fell in my lap, but 2 that also happened for my latest book, Banish Your Inner Critic. All that stuff together brought me to do the work I love, to be here standing in front of you talking for a long time about this right now. So what will you potentially get from banishing your inner critic? Maybe you'll get freedom, creativity, feeling like you're contributing, learning, empowerment, relief, collaboration, expansion, feeling empowered, feeling like what you're doing and what you do is fun. And not only that, I personally think that it will make you a stronger contributor, a stronger part of your team, right? What you do is actually meaningful and actually has import for other people. It'll make you a stronger collaborator. It'll make you more open to actually listening and talking and working with other people because you won't be so afraid that what you have isn't good enough, right? And it will also make you a stronger leader. It will also allow you to step into the things that you are potentially destined for, right? It will help you leave a legacy. Now, I'm not saying this is a process that's an easy one. It's a process of continuous improvement, right? Little bit of irony for you guys. So I wrote this book, totally got burnt out with writing the book, and so when it came to marketing and came to actually trying to get endorsements from people and stuff like that, I allowed my inner critic to run the show, and I didn't reach out to people because I didn't want to bother them. I don't want to bother them, they're busy, I don't want to ask for stuff and everything. So if you are interested, I might be sharing my process through my newsletter of actually trying to overcome that. And if you want the slides for this talk, because I personally think the pictures are pretty, go to deniseslides.com and just fill it in with your email address, and you'll get an email that sends you the slides immediately. So I'm going to leave that up for few more seconds. And I'll also tweet it out afterwards. And then also, if you're interested in the stuff that I talked about and want to know even more and even more exercises and stuff like that, it's all in the book, my book, Banish Your Inner Critic. And some of you may have even won it by being a veteran of the conference and everything. So, just to finish up, it starts with you, okay? It starts with you. You may have felt like it wasn't possible before. Like, I'm just destined to have this inner critic. It's just going to be here all the time. And so we might as well just get comfortable. I might as well get it a cup of tea. We're just going to hang out and talk. Whatever it says is cool. It's probably right, so I'm just going to listen to it. Right. You may not have thought it was possible, but now, at least in this little time that we've had together, you've got tools. And like I said, if you get the book, you'll get even more tools, right? You'll get an expanded toolbox. And that it'll help you get past your blocks. Right? It'll help you get past those places of being like, I'm totally stuck. You'll have this toolbox. Oh, maybe I should swipe left. Maybe I should talk to a teddy bear. Maybe I should, own my uniqueness, step into my uniqueness. Maybe I should mentor somebody. And then you'll start to be able to make magic. But not just make magic, you'll start to be able to have an impact and affect other people positively. Here's what I think. I think the potential for greatness is in all of us. It's going to manifest in different ways, but I think we all have something that we came here to do, something that we're great at, that nobody else can do. And it's our job to figure out what that is. So the question is, are you going to hold yourself back, or you're going to kind of prune yourself and manage yourself and control yourself? Or are you going to really allow yourself to be fully magnificent? Here's my guess. My guess is that you want to be magnificent, and my guess is that you're ready to feel your creative power. So I want everybody to stand up, if you would. I want you all to think of your Heather, your Wyatt, your dad, or whoever it was that gave you those potential bad ideas, right? And so let's just try the swipe left thing. So just think of whatever it is that they said, and we're going to do 3 swipe lefts. You guys ready? So first one, swipe left, delete. Second one, ready? Delete. And then third one, swipe left and delete it. And I am going to swipe myself, not left, but right. And I'm done, y'all. Thank you so much. Oh, questions. We've got questions.
Not so fast.
Not so fast, young lady. Tell me everything.
There's so many questions.
Oh my gosh, you got questions. Yay.
And we're also mindful of our time.
Yes, I apologize for going over, but I had a lot to talk about.
No, it's good. There's so much inspiration. So there are a fair number of designers in the place.
Hello, designers.
And designers need that feedback, right? It can be fuel. So the question is, as a designer, my inner critic helped me stay humble and always push my limits. So how do you activate your inner critic when needed?
I have an answer for that.
Oh, boy.
Okay, the first part of the answer is that, like I was saying about the self-compassion, actually studies have shown, like everything that I talk about is based on research. This is not speculation or anything like this. It's not like, oh my God, so it's just going to feel better, so you should totally do it. It's based on research. And research has shown that actually when you're self-critical, it actually impedes your progress and impedes your success rather than contributes to it. I had a workshop. We had about 22 people in there on Wednesday, and one of the things I shared with them is that there is what I call a difference between your inner evaluator and your inner critic. And your inner evaluator is the part of you that knows what's good and knows what isn't. Your inner critic is somebody who just harps on you and is just mean. Ow, don't do that. Blah, blah, blah. Your inner evaluator says, you know what? That could use some work. That doesn't really meet the standards that we need to meet, so why don't you work on it some more? Your inner critic says, that sucks. So I encourage you to recognize when you need your inner evaluator, and when your inner evaluator's there that says, let's work on this some more. Let's maybe get some feedback and stuff like that. Let's sleep on it, iterate on it tomorrow. And the difference between that and your inner critic was just like, oh my God, I can't even believe you think that's good enough. Right? So that's my answer for that one.
Any advice from managers leading teams of people who can sometimes be held back by negative thinking?
So one of the things that I think is really great for managers is, first of all, to recognize what's happening, to go, oh, okay, you guys have got some inner critic stuff going on, and then to actually, again, have a toolbox where you're like, hey, so what are you thinking about this? And then to actually try to encourage them in the way that is probably going to be helpful. Maybe give them some advice like, you know, what I think you should do is, you know, I personally I can weigh in and I can say that this isn't awful, it just needs this kind of work. Or if you're giving criticism, to try to give very specific things about the person's behavior and what needs to be fixed, and not have it be about the person themselves. It's one of the things that's awful about like reviews and things like that. I have more things. I also, you know, I hate to say it, but there's great stuff in the book. It's a great book for managers to have. There's a lot of tools in it. So,
thank you, Denise.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Boom. Bye, you guys. Thank you.
I'm helped.